Nox had hunted Trill many times before, but this one seemed particularly intense. He tracked the Trill further out into the forest of sun trees. The smell of death wafted into his nose, causing him to tense and pull his spear from his back. This was the smell that had this beast so out of sorts. He followed silently above the creature, watching it, until it found what it was so desperately looking for, a carcass. One Nox did not recognize as any creature he had seen before. Parts of it had already been torn away by other animals, not leaving much for the Trill to eat. The beast growled low, eating what it could of the strange creature, his nose turning upward into the air, inhaling something. Nox followed suit and took a deep inhale. The stench of death was strong, but under it he could smell something else. Something familiar, but strange. It set his nerves on fire, making the feathers on his ears and tail expand as if presenting. He needed to find whatever it was that made this scent before the Trill did. With renewed interest, Nox followed carefully, keeping his own scent downwind. He followed the Trill till the sister moons were high in the sky again, and the smell of death replaced with that odd scent that made him astutely aware of himself. He watched the beast stop and crouch low to the ground. He took this chance to shift into a better tree just above it. Then he froze. His golden eyes locked on her. A female! A siren! He was frozen in place. What was a siren doing out here alone and without her harem? His nostrils flared as he took in her scent. Movement broke his trance. The beast was moving in on the siren. This sent him into a rage he had never felt before, forcing a loud body-trembling roar from him as he leapt from the tree, burying his spear into the skull of the beast with a satisfying crunch of bone and tearing of flesh, sending the bright blood of the creature outward. He bared his fangs in a silent hiss as he twisted the spear out of its skull. His chest heaving, and the feathers of his tail and tips of his ears fanned out in an onyx-colored display. He flicked the spear to the side, sending splatters of blood across the ground. His golden eyes fell on the siren now. He was struck with an overwhelming sense of disquiet. There was a siren here, in the middle of the Trill's hunting grounds, and not an Ashka in sight. He stepped off the creature's body, stabbing his spear into the ground. He moved with a slow, tentative stride towards her. She was incredibly small, and her skin a pale white in contrast to the bright splatters of blood that now covered her. The vibrant red of her hair put the bright sun trees to shame, his eyes meeting hers for the first time, and they made his breath hitch in his throat. He had never seen such a green before. She was different, odd. Like him, she watched him with a look of distress on her face. He knew he had acted brazenly and offended her in some way. He felt a twinge of shame in his chest as his eyes took in her blood-splattered form. There was no way she would forgive him, he thought. A proper Ashka would have dispatched it quietly, the complete opposite of what he had just done. He crouched low, head down, offering her the top of his head in remorse. He waited for the inevitable strike, but it never came. Instead, he heard a soft thump. Nox waited a few seconds and still nothing. He risked upsetting her further and raised his head to look. His eyes went wide. She had crumpled to the ground in a small heap. He knelt down beside her, his large calloused hands lifting her off the forest floor and made for the trees. He would come back for his kill and spear later. He set her down slowly, making sure she was stable on the thick branch of the sun tree. Taking a second look, just to be sure she wouldn't fall, and set to work on bending smaller, stouter branches into a sizable nest, using the soft yellow leaves as bedding. He wasn't adept at making nests. He never really had the need to make anything for anyone but himself. But if it held him, it would hold her, and that's all that mattered. He pulled a small stone knife from the leather strap at his chest and cut the vines free from the tree and used them to bind the last bits of branches together, making sure it was secure. It was crude, but it would work. Nox turned to the siren again and moved to lift her into the nest gently. He thought for a moment that maybe she was a kit, due to her small stature, though the fullness of her chest told him otherwise. He lay her down on the leaves, brushing the wild red curls from her face. She was so different than anything he had seen before, and this drew him in. Everything about her was the opposite of his people, the only similarity being the shape of their frames. His gold eyes looked her over in the twin moon's light. She looked sickly, and this made his brow furrow in worry. He did not know how to heal. That was specifically a siren's job. The Ashka were not permitted to do such things. With what he knew, he put into action. He pulled a water fruit from the tree and pierced the thick hide with his stone knife. Slipping the knife back into its holster, he gently reached down and tipped her head forward, tilting the contents of the fruit into her mouth slowly. Each movement he made was deliberate and slow. Her throat moved as her body worked on instinct to take in the water. His eyes narrowed in focus as he watched the color return to her. He let out a long breath he didn't know he was holding. Knox continued to periodically give her water until the fruit was half empty. He set it down beside him as he sat back on his feet. He watched her. Hours passed and the sun started to rise again. He was glad that more color had returned to her. Though it was not the color of his people, he assumed it was a good sign. His shoulders slumped slightly as he started to relax. He took a breath and caught her scent mingled with a strong scent of urine and the blood of Trill. He leaned forward, wanting to get a better idea of what she smelled like, hoping that the closer he got to her skin, the less he would smell the things that mingled with it. As his face was inches from her nose, green eyes snapped open, and he felt something collide with the side of his face, sending him reeling back onto his backside with a loud, startled grunt. She had struck him. He knew he had it coming, but he hadn't expected her to wake and strike his face so suddenly. His hand went to his jaw. It didn't hurt him, just what little pride he had.